Hey, I'm Lily with Monitorbase, and today we're here with William. He is our Vice President of Business Development here, and he's an excellent person to kind of dig into. Today, we're kind of focusing on more self-help type of questions because William is an excellent role model of kind of living a productive and very fulfilling life from my eyes. So thanks for being here with us, William, and being willing to answer all these questions.
I don't know if I'll answer all the questions, but you're very welcome.
That's fair. You don't have to answer any ones that you don't want to. So when I first met William, one of the first conversations that we had was about books. So let's go ahead and start there. What are your favorite books, and what are kind of the lessons or things that you've really pulled out of them that you live by?
My favorite books. So I would say books are very personal in the sense that not every book is for everyone. So you have to kind of know yourself and what's going to be most impactful for you. So I'll answer this question for me. But when I make book recommends to people, usually I try and tailor it to what I know about them. For me, one of my favorite books was, honestly, I love Richest Man in Babylon. It's a simple, short book with very potent and very relevant lessons. So it was very motivating for me to see kind of the simplicity and the clarity. And even to this day, I pull back to some of the lessons in there. So I really enjoyed that book. As far as other content, I've thoroughly enjoyed Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life and many of his lectures. And I'm kind of a fangirl for Jordan Peterson and some of he's put out, as far as like some of his older lectures were just fascinating to me. I
actually picked up that book sorry to interrupt. I pulled up that book. I bought it a couple months ago, but I haven't picked it up. And I actually picked it up last night for the very first time. I didn't get very far, but I've heard it's amazing.
You have to know that I'm an audiobook person. I don't spend very much time jumping in and just like reading new content. So if I open my Audible account, which I've had for as long as I can remember, I just have hundreds and hundreds of books, and I've listened to all of them. So I don't know, it's like, if you want self-help related, I can give you some of those, but I found some incredibly interesting other topics. One of the bigger ones that, and I think this is a little cheesy, and again, it's like not for everyone. I'm naturally quite, kind of high strung, anxious, diligent, and so winding down has been a big deal for me, and being able to kind of step back from work, which is kind of my natural state, is that working hard. So there was a book called The Power of Now, and by Eckhart Tolle. And that to me was a very impactful book when I read it, because it was meditative. I know, and again, it's like, depending on your personality, that might not do anything for you, but it really helped me kind of wind down a little bit and get better control on my anxiety, which was kind of an introduction for me to start getting into meditation and a few other things that have been really helpful. So beyond that, I mean, maybe I should have prepared and been on, a little bit more prepped based on these questions. The Goal was a really great book. Another one, What Everybody is Saying, or What Everybody is Saying. It's by a CIA, I think it's CIA or FBI interrogator. And so he had some incredible insights on body language and understanding people. There's a book called Persuasion, and then there's another one that's come out after that by, I think it's Kiyosaki, and maybe I'm mixing that up, but some incredible insights into human psychology and people's responses and social effects on groups. So just working in sales and marketing, those have been some really interesting ones to me. Let me look through this list and see if anything else sticks out. Honestly, when I was young, I read like 15 or so. I think I read The 4-Hour Workweek, which I try and embody everything in there, but kind of the inspiration and the essence of it was related to efficiency and systems and really focusing on the things that matter the most and ignoring things that don't, or automating or really outsourcing. And you can't do that, but it completely, and he certainly paints a very extreme example, but at least when I was young, that gave me a way to start trying to look at and shape the world. And I think that was very helpful for me, because even though you can, I never really expected to achieve the ideal that he tried to push for. But nonetheless, it was useful to start looking at how you could get closer to that, because those efficiencies really matter, I think, over time. I don't know, I've really enjoyed this past year and a half. I've tried to move into a little bit more nonfiction. I'm sorry, out of nonfiction into a little bit more fiction, just because I think it's supposed to help round out your personality just a little bit better. And I might be a little extreme on some of my personality traits. So I've been enjoying some of that, but that's not really in the self-help category.
Well, if there's one fiction book that you've read recently that you would recommend, what would it be?
We Are Legion, We Are Bob. It's actually a trilogy, but very interesting. I thoroughly enjoyed the humor. I thought it was a really fun book series.
All right. And you already talked about this a little bit because you said you listen to audiobooks, but is there a certain process that you follow going back to nonfiction or those kind of, interesting, lesson-filled, lesson-rich type of books? Is there a certain process that you follow when you're listening to or reading those where you maybe take notes on important lessons, or how do you kind of retain the information that you gather?
So honestly, I've just made it social where I tell people about it. If something comes up, I'll try and teach it to someone or explain it to someone, be that coworkers or family or friends. And that to me is how I've helped to try and sink some of those lessons. Now, I don't really have a process when it comes to reading books. I don't force myself to finish the books I read. I finish a majority of the books that I start. But if I start one and I'm halfway through and I'm really just having to fight myself to get into it, I will discard it and I'll move on to another one that I'm enjoying more. And that's not always the case. There are certainly topics where I'll work harder and it's worth it to get through it. But if it's just not clicking, I'll generally move to another one. I think there's enough good content out there and there are enough good books that it's okay for some of them, for you to skip some of them.
I really like that you have the ability to let that go, because sometimes I find that hard. One thing that you also mentioned was kind of finding that balance of different, rounding yourself out. And you're a really interesting person to me because not only are you very efficient, you've kind of found all these ways to really improve your work life, but you also have a wonderful family with the most adorable children ever. And you have a lot of really interesting hobbies too. And so what are your strategies or maybe habits that help you round out and keep that balance in your life across different, facets?
Well, honestly, you've been working here for a while, so you've seen as I've actually moved further in that direction. I've not always been, I guess, how I currently am. I used to be much more focused on work and much less focused on other interests. So ironically, the reason I started to pursue more interests and that's gained momentum is because I stopped drinking, or almost completely stopped drinking. I'll have maybe one or two drinks, maybe a few times a year. But my goal is to really just stay this course. And it's helped me with anxiety and a whole set of things. But as a result of not drinking, there are social activities that you're no longer, I guess, as interested in. And in a lot of ways, and it's weird to say, but people aren't comfortable hanging out with you if you're not drinking and they are. And so it actually opened up in a lot of ways, a lot of time for me. And not being able to just you're not going to go home and just have a beer. I started pursuing other things. So that actually opened up for me to be able to go out and pursue things like, some of my hobbies like forging and I have one of these because I wanted to show it to Kevin today, but I finished up a knife this week that's kind of fun. And my camera's blurry, so you can't really see it. Anyway, so that's a hobby
stunning.
that's very hard. It's a physical activity. but I enjoy the art of it. I'm not very artistic, but I have historically worked in different, I guess construction and manufacturing fields. So I'm good with my hands as far as building things, and it's gratifying to me to be able to make something that I'm proud of. Right now, I work at a company where I sit at a desk and I sell data. It's not even like I sit at a desk and I sell something that ships out. No, it's like I sell information, and so it's been really nice for me to be able to like actually build something, because I probably couldn't explain to my kids what I do at work every day. And I enjoy it. I don't know. I don't know if other people feel that pull, but I feel like it's very gratifying to be a maker or a builder of something. So, whether that's gardening in the summer or the forging that I do, or just working on stuff on my house, putting in a gazebo or things like that. It's really gratifying for me to go through the work and do it and have that thing, in my life afterwards.
Well, and you also involve your family on those types of hobbies, right? Like I've heard you say that your daughter helped make the knife that you made for me. Actually, can you talk a little bit more about forging? Just because I don't think that that's something that a lot of people know a lot about, or even know how to get into if they're interested. So can you kind of walk us through what forging looks like from the start to finish process? So William made a knife for me, and it's a gorgeous knife. And he sent me a couple pictures along the way of him creating it. But the fact that he had forged something into an actual finished product, just one person, absolutely blew my mind. And I know that it happens all the time, and it has happened for the history of forever. But I've never done that. And so it was really an interesting thing for me to see come to life.
Yeah. So I started forging because my wife bought me a little class. It was like a 4-hour course for 2 people. So I actually recruited my brother and actually 2 of my brothers, and made one of them buy themselves the course. So we showed up, and in 4 hours, we went through and started with like a little block of steel and ended up with a little knife. And it wasn't a good knife. It wasn't a pretty knife, but we just ended up with a knife. But it was really gratifying, and it was interesting because I just never having dealt with metal in that way. We'd each worked in construction, and we used to do cabinets and trim and some of that manufacturing. So we've had some history building things and working on making them, I guess, finishing and making things nice. So forging started for me with that. Now the forging process, I'm not great at it. I'm definitely a novice, but it's fun because you can continually improve. And each time you go through the process, you learn all the things that you did wrong that time. And then the next time you try and correct that. And then the next time you try and correct that. And as you go, you get more and more attention to detail. You're more aware of the things that are going to happen further in the process. But forging, it doesn't actually take too much as far as tools. Anvils are just a little bit expensive, but the nice thing is they maintain their resale value because they're a little bit expensive and rare. So I got an anvil and a hammer, and I had a little sander grinder already. And so I built a forge out of bricks and some little propane components. If you want to learn anything, definitely go to YouTube. After doing the class, I started watching Forged in Fire because the instructor actually mentioned it. And that was really fun and motivating for me. And I feel like you can actually learn quite a bit by watching some of these TV shows now. They do a great job of walking through and showing different aspects of the process. And in that one, they have, expert panelists that sit and comment on and address certain things. So I feel like I picked up a lot of information from that. But once I had my basic tools, the hammer, the forge, the anvil, the grinder, you basically just go out there and you start hammering something into roughly the shape that you'd like. There are lots of people that can make a knife. They just buy a piece of metal and they go to the grinder and they shape it completely. They don't need to hammer it or forge it at all. And so you can really start on the forging side and do whatever you'd like, and then finish the rest of it on the grinder. Now, working in carpentry, I have a lot of experience with sanders, and whether that's a belt sander or a hand sanding or any of those components, I've dealt with that machinery. So going from that to the sander, I had no problem just really jumping in, and they call it a grinder when it comes to forging. But so just once you go through the process one time and you realize, okay, my first knife is terrible, but I learned a lot, and I learned how much I can correct further down the process and what you can't correct further down the process. Then you just start pushing your limits a little bit. And okay, that was a lot of grinding, and I feel like I can do less grinding if I hammer it more and get it flatter and straighter and elements like that. And so then you start paying attention to what other people do, follow some people on social media. You start seeing different styles that you like. Kevin, my brother, who also works here with me as doing some design, he actually came up with a couple of design versions that we liked based on examples I sent you, or I sent him. And so we came up with kind of a version that we liked, and that's actually what I just showed you is a version of what was kind of what he designed and then what we were actually able to create, because it certainly doesn't always match the template plan. But once you've, I guess, to quickly go through the process, you're heating up the metal till it's quite hot and obviously glowing, and then you're hammering it to shape, and it cools off very quickly. Usually you have about 30 seconds per round. So the more you hammer it out, the flatter and thinner it gets, the quicker it heats up. So it actually builds in intensity as far as amount of work as you go. It starts off slow, but it picks up, and by the end, you have something that's pretty much shaped. All stills aren't the same, but depending on your still, you'll be able to look up, or it'll come with certain instructions on how to harden it. Because when you heat up steel and then let it cool off slowly, with carbon steels at least, it becomes soft. And then when you heat up steel and you cool it off very quickly with a quench, it hardens, and it's actually a change in the material. And so once you've got it shaped, you can go and grind it to shape somewhat, but ultimately you're going to have to heat the steel up again, get it up to a certain critical temperature, remove it from the forge, and then quench it in oil and cool it off very quickly. And so that process actually hardens the steel and is what gives it the ability to hold an edge. So coincidentally, I'll pull this up again. So you'll notice this has a kind of a transition line. This is a different part. It's not two different kinds of steel. I layered this with clay on the back, and I left this raw. And the clay basically ends up being a heat trap. So when you heated it up, it all got glowing. But when I quenched it and I put it in the quenchant, this part cooled off quickly, and this part cooled off slowly because it had a big thick piece of clay on each side. And so this part is hard and this part isn't. And that line is the transition between the two. And so that's just an example of it actually makes a physical difference in the metal that you can see in this case. So once you've done that and you quenched it, you sand it, and then you sand it some more, and then you hand sand it, and then you hand sand it some more, and then you polish it. At some point in there, you attach the handle, however, whatever style or whatever handle you decide to design. I have a lot of, again, woodworking history. So the handles were the easy part for me to jump into. The metal work was the part that was interesting to me. So.
And that particular knife it looks like the particular type of wood, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I know we had talked about that one really dark wood that you had from,
so
it's from, I can't remember the name of it.
Yeah, so this is called Ziricote, and it is, it's actually an endangered tree now. So you can't really buy it, at least not in mass. But I was born in Mexico, and we immigrated to the US when I was about 7. But my dad was a carpenter in Mexico, and we had a carpentry shop. So him and my mom worked on a kitchen table that we ended up bringing up with us. It was a project they were working on, and they never finished it. So it had been in storage forever, and none of us were willing to take on the project of trying to finish this gigantic table. So my family agreed to let me harvest the materials off of it, which was this wood. So it's actually about 25 years old. It was harvested in the jungle right where I worked near, and now it's an endangered kind of wood species. So it's kind of fun. It's a very dark, very heavy wood. It can be, the heart of it can be dense enough that it doesn't float. It's surprisingly easy to work with given how hard it is. But I really like the look, the dark material. My favorite material, like wood previous to this, was like dark walnut. So like I have a desk that I made that I work at that is made of dark walnut. But this was kind of fun to get some material.
I didn't know you made your desk. That's cool.
Yeah, I've had it for like 13 or 14 years, but I made the desk that I work at just because, I don't know, again, it's like somehow I enjoy the process of building something and then using it over time. I think it's just more gratifying for me that I built it, I guess. And it's not even that it's better quality. It's certainly not better quality than a lot of things, but it's pretty fun.
No, yeah, that is fun. There's a certain satisfaction in creating things. Yeah, it almost is like a healing property sometimes, just to be able to create something.
It's definitely very therapeutic.
Yes. So you have another interesting hobby that I want to talk about, and that's that you're a private pilot. So how did you get into that? What made you want to become a pilot? And then kind of what's the process? What does it look like? Tell us about your plane. I want to hear all of it.
I got into being a pilot because my father-in-law he actually has a private jet. But one time I got to fly with him to California, and we just had Madison. I don't think she was a year old yet. And so we flew to California, and 45 minutes later we were in San Diego. And then we were actually, part of the arrangement was we were actually picking up a vehicle in California and bringing it back to Southern Utah. And it was the 45-minute flight and the 8-hour drive that convinced me to be a pilot, especially with children. So I actually met some family there, and we drove back with a group of us and just, sad, upset babies in the back of a vehicle. Like moving from Mexico to the United States, we drove, and it was 3 days of 18-hour days of driving. Now it's a little faster than that to make the drive, but we actually made that trip multiple times when I was a child to come visit family and do stuff. And I absolutely despised just sitting in the car for an entire day. Like, I'll sit in my house for an entire day and it doesn't bother me, but just like that pent up. So it was kind of the answer to being able to jump into, I guess, a hobby. I call it a hobby because it costs money, but jump into something that was fun and exciting and also kind of open up the world. So I jumped into my training. It doesn't take a ton of money to become a private pilot. You can do it with, depending on how you do it, it cost me about $5,000. You can go to some schools and for about $10,000 you can do it, and they have a whole program. I was more of like maybe a do-it-yourself type, in that I sat down, I bought all the study material, and I passed my written test before I'd ever actually worked with an instructor, which is usually it's a little backwards. A lot of people will go through and they'll work with their instructor throughout the flight process, and at the end, before they take the final exam, they'll take the written test and then the final exam. But I got my studying done. I passed that, and it prepared me to go through, and I understood all of the requirements of becoming a private pilot. So I found an instructor who was willing to work with me, and I was very focused throughout. So I was able to do it in not quite the minimum amount of hours, but close to the minimum amount of hours.
What is the minimum amount of hours?
40 hours. So there are places you can go get your private pilot's license in 7 days. And start to finish, you'll leave a private pilot. So upon completing that process, I actually went and bought my plane about 1 month later. And I'd already chosen it out. It was, I have a 1965 Mooney M20E, and I bought it because of really the stats on the Mooney is really good as far as cost for maintenance, cost for fuel, and speed. And so it's a 4-person plane, single engine. 1965 sounds scary to people, but the truth is every year I have to go in and spend thousands of dollars to have mechanics go through and check every aspect of the plane to make sure it's safe. To make sure it passes all the really safety requirements. And what you don't realize, every time there's an airplane crash that isn't an experimental airplane, because experimental airplanes are their own world. They're not held to the same regulations. People jump into that because it's not held to the same regulations. But when they show up to an experimental airplane crash, they basically check the box that this crash would cause because this was an experimental plane. When you show up to a non-experimental, so your standard certified aircraft, they do some very thorough investigations, and every time they can find what caused the crash, they document it and they publish it, and all the information is available. 95% of airplane crashes are pilot error, not mechanical failure. And so in the 5% of crashes that are mechanical failure rather than pilot error, they'll go through, and if it was, what if it was an engine failure, they'll investigate what caused the engine failure. And so anytime a plane like mine, or any plane using the same parts as mine, has crashed because of a failing part, they'll go and issue an aircraft directive. And it's a safety directive that says before any plane, and sometimes it'll ground all the planes with the part, but any plane before it's certified safe at the next annual, or within the next 6 months, or immediately, if it was this certain oil hose that caused the crash, that oil hose has to be replaced on every plane that has that oil hose on it. And so since 1965, that's been going on. And I have a whole list of all of the changes items that have caused crashes that have had to be replaced on my plane. So at this point, you've had years and years and years and years of these planes being flown, not crashing. And anytime that something has caused a crash, it's had to be replaced. So they become, I think they're very safe aircraft. They've got a great airframe. And again, most airplane crashes a vast majority are caused by pilot error. So for me, it's about having confidence in myself and then making sure I maintain the currency, the training, and I only operate in environments that I'm comfortable with. So understanding the weather and understanding the elements that go into that. So you have to study, you can't just take it lightly. But that to me is part of the joy. It's something you can really understand and dig into it. And then, I get to do it for work. I get to go, I work remote from you guys. So when I come up there, I get to fly up, and it allows me to go up and spend a day or two, and then get home in a really quick manner, which is really the joy of it. It takes the whole world and it shrinks it down and it makes it a lot smaller.
Oh, I love that. So when you were talking about the crashes, that's including all plane crashes. I mean, other than those experimental ones. So private, commercial.
Absolutely.
That's so interesting. What lessons from these hobbies, because there's so many different moving parts in forging or being a pilot, processes and getting licensed, and then just the process of actually going, and you have to do your pre-flight check and things like that. I would imagine that there's elements of those that carry into business, right? I'm just prodding here. Are there certain pieces of those hobbies that have kind of translated into your work life or other areas of your life that you think that not everybody's going to have the chance or maybe even want to be a pilot. So is there any kind of lesson that you can pull and
let me
apply here?
Pre-flight is a good one. We have marketing systems that we launch, and it's going to, tens of thousands of people. And there's always this, have we thought of everything? And so it's helped me. And we actually call some of these checklists our pre-flight checklists. So you're going in and you're saying, right now in this moment, before I hit send or hit launch, have I checked all the things I need to check? And so just the ability to have a good checklist of what you need to go through and organizing based on that, it's human nature. You're going to forget some detail. And if it's important, you can't leave it to just your memory. And so even though I've gone through my pre-flight 100 times, I have a checklist, and every single time I'll go through and I'll read every item out loud. And it's rare, but every so often it's no, I forgot to check if that latch was locked on the plane. And so it's that same process, or that thought process of making something repeatable and documenting it and maintaining that over time, because it's not just about helping yourself. It's about also being able to train and help others. And when you go through a document, it's actually a really good educational experience. You'll find that there are things that maybe you do that aren't necessary, and you do it every time you think, every time it happens. Once a month, you're going through this process for whatever reason, but maybe you follow the same process every time. When you sit down and you start writing it down and organizing, you can often find efficiencies. So from that aspect, I think that would be one example. The bigger one to me has been just the self-confidence of going out and figuring something out and researching, and you can figure just about everything out by doing a few Google searches or watching some YouTube videos. And you don't need a ton of formal training. Obviously you do, to become a pilot, but there's so much that you can teach yourself. And there's so much that you can learn just on your own, free or very inexpensive. And that'll help you get, leaps and bounds toward a goal without having to go and, I guess, I could have gone and spent, $10,000 at a flight school and just followed their curriculum. But I very much sat down and I designed a curriculum for myself. And I went through and I understood all the requirements. And I'm guessing it was probably more labor. It took more time for me to do it that way than just following someone else's curriculum. But I thoroughly understood the process, start to finish. And that's given me some self-confidence. But again, like foraging as well, where you can go out and you can actually learn something. And as you go, you improve. I think you're capable of learning so much on your own. And I'm always a little bit surprised when I'm scared to start something. I'm not sure I can do it. But when I jump in, it's something that you can figure out just about anything out there. And it kind of shrinks the world. It makes the world a smaller place, a more accessible place. It makes things more within reach.
I like that. I've noticed, and that's actually something that I had written down as a question for you, is that you have an attitude of always learning about whatever it is. And it's something that at least in my experience, you have to kind of be conscious of. So when I was learning French, especially in the beginning, when I was living in France, I was extremely conscious of learning the grammar principles, the new words. And so I would always make a point of asking, what was that word that you said? Can you spell it? And I always kept a notebook on me and wrote it down. And I was very conscious of that. But a couple months in, when I got more comfortable and you can kind of put the context around the words and you don't have to understand every single word to be able to understand a person. And then of course there's, it takes a minute out of your time with talking to somebody to ask them can you rewind in your sentence and say that word again? And can you spell it? So sometimes I got lazy. And then over time I saw that I was plateauing. And so I was like, what were those habits? And I had to become again conscious of that learning. So what are the conscious practices that you use to keep that attitude of always learning?
To me, I'm so routine oriented. It's a little bit ridiculous. I do things the same every single day. I just don't, I don't need a ton of novelty. And I have fun hobbies that I enjoy. And that to me is where I find joy. But just to keep myself from plateauing, I'm relatively okay with me, changing an interest if I really lose interest or it doesn't fit. But I don't do it very often, so I don't have to fight that. But just within my daily structure, I have daily reading in the morning. On my commute from, home from work, I'll listen to audiobooks. And so I've structured where I have just part of my routine. Those are just some examples where I am constantly out there trying to acquire new information or going through a process of developing that. And so I've just made it systematic and a part of my life. And then I'm always out there looking for new books to fill my list so that as I'm going through that, I can keep it populated. Which ends up meaning I'm reading a couple of books a month, maybe 2 or 3 books a month. And that to me is mostly how I do it. Sometimes that'll turn into again, you can find a YouTube video that's 30 minutes long that covers a concept or a topic, and it'll help you understand something that you're trying to learn how to do. And so I'll do that as well. That can be something that I study, and I'm interested in it, so I just pursue the things that I'm interested in. I'm usually working on learning something, and so I'm just in that topic for whatever topic I'm in at the time. That's what I'm studying.
Do you also do things like as you're in a conversation or maybe working throughout the day, if you stumble across something that you don't have an answer to, do you have a habit of going to Google and searching that up right then, or maybe making a list on your phone if you have a book that you want to read or things like that?
So socially, yes. If people bring something up, I'm always looking for a specific topic. Maybe I've been in the job role too long that I'm in, but I don't feel like a lot of stuff comes up where it's I don't understand that. I mean, I certainly have questions that I'll ask the dev team on how something is programmed, what some of the business logic is. But usually it's like I'll go right to and add that book to my wish list, and it'll then be when I'm up to choosing my next book to purchase, it'll be right there at the top of the list.
I like that. Going back to, I thought when you were talking about the plane crashes, the process that they had for analyzing those crashes was really interesting. And it made me want to come back to this question of failure. So failure can be kind of tricky sometimes, but what are the ways that you've, because everybody experiences failure on different levels at different times. But and not that you have to go into those failures specifically, but what lessons have you been able to take from failures, or what are the ways that you've been able to extract the goodness from those difficult moments?
So I think you have to kind of have an attitude or a determination that you can extract good from a difficult moment. And I don't want to sound flippant, because there are certainly very, very difficult things that happen in people's lives. And it can be, absolutely devastating. And so I guess I don't want to be, disrespectful of those situations. But as a general rule, a lot of the stuff that we deal with, I think people, they're viewing it as catastrophic, or at least that's the feeling or the experience they're going through. And if you can try and maintain the attitude of, what can I learn? How can this help me? It's really about not giving up, I think. And it's not just like never quit. You have to be looking forward and saying, if someone loses a job and they're looking at that situation, they can get down on themselves, and they can say, well, it was my fault and I did all these things wrong and I'll never be okay. And you can really go down a rabbit hole. But you might look at it and say, I didn't really love the job anyways. And I certainly did some things wrong that caused me to lose that job. But if you can take that step forward and say, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to change and proceed toward a job that I like more, that gets me closer to an end goal that I'm trying to move toward. It's kind of two different directions that you can go. And I think with any failure, you can approach it from the perspective of what can I learn? How can I turn this to my advantage? How can I use this to help me get closer? And in some circumstances, it's just going to be, how can I get back on track? But you have to maintain that attitude of continually pursuing the goal. So failure to me is, you're certainly going to have the reality of things not going as planned, and that can be catastrophic. It can be really, really, big, difficult things. And I think you just have to reset and return to where you are right now, recalibrate and say, okay, I'm not where I thought I was. And a lot of the time, I think that's the case. Like, you thought you were doing good at this situation and you were doing all the right things, and something goes wrong. And suddenly your whole world that you thought you were in is gone. It's destroyed. And you find yourself in chaos. It's a new place that nothing is familiar. And so it's very overwhelming. So you kind of have to reorient yourself to what is the new reality. And really, it's the reality that's been there all along. But you try and, get oriented for where you're at, and then try and navigate, again, recentering where you're trying to go. And the truth is, all that happened in a lot of those cases is you got a more clear version of where you really were. And it's, that you had other things, other circumstances, or maybe hiding that from you, or you were ignoring it. And that's been the case in my life when things have not gone well or gone as I intended them to. Sometimes it's just because you were ignoring the facts, you were hiding from the facts. And so that, to me, it's about going back and saying, well, where am I and what do I actually want? And if you can answer those questions, that'll help orient you in the direction you need to go and what you need to do next. If you get stuck in the mentality of poor me, or this shouldn't have happened, or anything like that, I think you're refusing to accept the current circumstances. You're refusing to accept reality. And I think you always have to be, to get where you want to go, you have to be very grounded in what's real and what's true. And denial has no place in that. And so, I don't know, that's philosophically my view on failure.
Mm-hmm. Is there a specific example that you can think of where things didn't go exactly as planned that turned out to be sort of a defining moment for you?
So, I mean, I've had, projects or businesses that I've run that haven't gone as planned, where, an industry absolutely shifts and suddenly what you were previously doing is not irrelevant, but the whole world is different than what I thought it was. And, you go from everything going well to almost nothing going well. And that to me has just opened my eyes to the realities of the cycles of business. And you learn about, I've learned about risk and how to actually assess that. And it's very easy to underestimate risk in a circumstance when everything is good and everything is going well. And it's so easy to forecast forward and say it will always be this way. And even when things are going bad, it's really easy to forecast forward and say it'll always be this way. So I think just learning and recalibrating, you develop over time a better and a more accurate perspective. And so, I don't know, that's probably as specific as I want to be, but that would be an example where even in a horrible situation, if you get a better perspective on life and you actually have a better view on how things are and a better understanding of how the world works, you're going to walk through life more confident, more sure, and much better prepared. So even in a catastrophic situation, I think you can still walk away with value. And again, I do want to add the addendum. There are certainly circumstances that are just absolutely awful, but just generally speaking, business the type of stuff, I believe that's going to be the case. It's a good rule.
You brought up something really interesting, which is risk. Do you have any advice for kind of assessing and analyzing those risks? What factors really do make it a risk versus maybe some that are over estimated?
Yeah. So I don't know what's the best case scenario and what's the worst case scenario. And like investing in the stock market, people say, don't invest more than you can afford to lose. And as a general rule, I would say the same thing. Don't extend yourself in risks that you can't afford to go in the worst case scenario. And people will argue with me and they'll certainly find examples that are correct. But I think as a rule, people underestimate, I guess they'll underestimate how bad something can be, and they'll overestimate, in a lot of cases, their capacity. And so particularly where I see that is in borrowing and in debt. People are willing to go out and, I would say, live beyond their means. And that's a risk because you have two people working a job. Me and my wife both work, and we try and live a very, a budget and a I guess a budget conscious life as far as that's concerned. But I see a lot of people my age who I don't believe are doing as well as I am as far as I guess success in business. And I see that they live certainly a more lavish lifestyle than I do. And from what I can tell, they're spending all the money that they earn. And the risk of that is you go out there and it's one thing to, earn $1,000 and spend all of it that month. But what they're actually doing is they're earning $1,000 for a few months in a row. And then they're going out and pre-committing to spend 990 of those dollars every single month. Whether that's in credit cards or student loans for a degree that maybe doesn't translate to a job, or that's a house that is larger than they maybe need. And as you do that, what you'll find out is your time becomes a slave to your job. But also, if one of those people loses their job, it can be absolutely catastrophic. And so for me and my anxious self, that is living on the knife's edge of disaster. And so I see a lot of people, and I think they underestimate the risks of just their behavior. And maybe that's because I'm an immigrant and I was, grew up very poor, and I saw what people were doing. And so that to me is probably one of the big examples of taking on risk. You're out there, you're not just like being flippant with, what you have in your pocket that day. You actually can't afford to lose what you're gambling. You're out there pre-committing yourself to things that are, have long-term consequences. And, I came out of school and, entering the job market, and then, the 2007, 2008 market crash happened. And I watched the devastation that caused, and how people's speculation, it really did ruin people's lives. And so that shaped my view of risk and what you should be willing to borrow money for, and what you should be willing to, how far you should be willing to extend yourself. So I don't know, that's my view of risk. I'm very conservative. So I don't think that's necessarily the right view. That's just the view that I guess helps me sleep at night.
No, it's that falls in line with something that I've been thinking about a lot this week, because I've been listening to the Derek Sivers interviews. I have found him on the Tim Ferriss podcast, and he's a very delightful and very interesting person. But he talks about minimalism, which I haven't necessarily prescribed to minimalism, because I don't know. I guess I just haven't been that type of person. My sister has been very minimalistic her entire life. So I've seen her, and I think I've always been intrigued by it, but I just don't really have that kind of tendency. Not that I'm a hoarder or anything, but what he talked about that really made me kind of light up inside was that if you don't need a lot, then you're just a lot more free. And so when people make these commitments, especially financially, to things in the future, like if you have this car loan that's really expensive, and your expensive house, and just all these subscriptions and things, you have all of a sudden added all this commitment. It's not necessarily the amount of stuff, but it's the commitment level. And then you have to supplement that by income, and maybe that means working extra jobs. And then you're just suddenly kind of this, shackled to all these things that you've committed to because you've chosen this expensive lifestyle, which, at best, nothing happens and you continue to sustain that, and that's great. And maybe you really enjoy it. But not only, in a worst case scenario, something goes wrong, and then you have all those, obligations, that you didn't have to subscribe to begin with, that you now have to deal with, but also just the ability to kind of, even if the worst case scenario didn't happen, you can still enjoy that freedom of, I don't need a lot, so I don't have to
live in more internal peace.
Yeah.
I'll quote Fight Club: you spend your life buying things you can't afford to impress people you don't like. And in a lot of cases, that is the case for people, but it's a little bit cynical. So I think you certainly don't. And another thing, a little thing I saw this week, and the average person in the United States today lives a more luxurious, a better life as far as the quality of life than what you would have seen a billionaire live with 100 years ago in 1920. And I mean, that's the case as far as what we have. And a lot of us are out there trying to have, the nicest things. And it's not because that extra niceness that we paid for improves the quality of our life significantly. It's oftentimes just to impress other people or to try and keep up. And I think that's pretty toxic. I think for inner peace and to feel okay with yourself, you need to, be able to isolate that from what other people think of. I guess you have to be able to isolate your self-worth from what other people's opinions are of you. And there's certainly use to looking around and taking social cues and understanding what's acceptable and not. But it shouldn't be to the point of causing you detriment and putting, excess financial strain on you and your family, or, pushing you to take on financial risk that you don't need. So there is some truth to the statement, or to the little line.
Yeah. Or even convincing yourself that you should be doing something just for yourself too. I should, have this lifestyle because it means a certain thing about me to me, and not just other people. But I totally agree. All right, let's see. Let's jump to, actually, Kay, this is something I want to dive into, because I think that you have this, you're sort of an expert in this area, which is those daily, and you touched on this, daily rituals, or maybe even they're weekly or monthly, But what are those habits, those routines that you have that have really set you up for success? And it doesn't mean that it has to apply to everyone, but for you, what are those things that have made a difference?
So for me, like I had to assess what I was struggling with, and like my family struggles with anxiety, and that can turn into depression, and that's, I just have to recognize genetically we have that predisposition. And so for me, recognizing some of those same traits in me at different points in my life, those were some of the biggest inhibitors for me, or the things that held me back the most. And so I had to shape or do something to try and get that under control. And in order to do that, I've adopted daily habits of meditation and prayer. But I mean, meditation is huge. Being able to sit down, and whatever meditation type that you choose, I think any of them are going to be very beneficial. But to be able to do that on a daily basis really helps me keep my head straight. A daily exercise is just massive. I try and get up in the morning and exercise, meditate, read, and that really mentally, physically prepares me for my day. And it's not just, I mean, you have to look at the cumulative effect of doing that over time, because not doing that for a day, you might get away with it without noticing much. But if you don't do it for a week, the difference is very stark. And you don't do that for a month, and the difference is, I mean, it's night and day. And so when I'm able to maintain those habits of, daily exercise, daily meditation, daily study, it's this process of, I guess, getting myself into a state of mind where I can tackle problems. And then when something goes poorly at work, or something doesn't go as planned, or failure occurs, or whatever it is, you're in a stronger state of mind. You have more willpower. You've got more focus. You're able to recenter sooner. And so in all of that to me is everyone should do some version of that. Everyone's going to deal with slightly different things, but if you can take the time, and it really is it is me time. It is very important to me. But if you can take that time, I feel like it has prepared me to be a better person, and I bring a better version of myself to everything I do as a result of it. And I know that if I don't do that, I'm going to be walking around really as a less capable version of myself. And it's like you are the person that you're going to experience life. I mean, you're experiencing life through yourself and through your level of health and your well-being. It affects and touches absolutely everything that you're going to interact with. So I think people underestimate the impact that has. And I think it sneaks up on people, especially, you'll go from being young and you don't have to work as hard about some of these things. But I don't know, for me, I found that as time was going on, I had to be more conscious and more focused and more consistent in order to maintain a good mindset and a good headspace. And it's been really, really helpful for me. That to me has been, I mean, that's my routine. Beyond that, I've tried to implement like weekly things or consistent things that I do on a regular basis. Like taking my kids to Taekwondo is something I do regularly. It's pre-scheduled. But that's just an example. If they didn't like Taekwondo, I would find something else that we could do together to have that connection. And I think, I don't know, it's like I would put everything in my calendar if I needed to. And I very much live out of my calendar, to which you can attest since you see my calendar. It's just like, it's how I budget and schedule and figure things out and organize. But that to me is really useful to try and design it, because if not, even if you wake up early and you don't have a plan, you're going to jump on your phone and you're going to spend the whole time, spend the morning on your phone, and nothing's going to get done. It's very easy to burn through day after day after day of doing nothing, when in the same amount of time you could have read a book or accomplished and move forward. So I try and cut out the bad and replace it with good, and do that on a consistent basis. And to me, it's been helpful.
Well, and it seems like you always have very healthy sleep habits, in the sense that, well, you try to go to bed early every night, right?
Yeah. So I've always struggled with sleep, though. So I've had a hard time getting enough sleep. So to me, it's been, and I forgot to mention that it has been a really big component is to my well-being is getting consistent sleep. And so I've forced myself to maintain a good habit there. And at this point, it's like I could look at my little sleep tracker. I track everything. I could look at my sleep tracker and you'll see that I wake up before my alarm every single day. For no reason, I wish I could sleep till my alarm. It sounds nice, but about 4:30 rolls around and for whatever reason I wake up. And so I have to assume that if I'm not using all the sleep that I've allotted myself, I'm probably okay on my 6 or 6.5 hours a night, because I'm giving myself the chance and I don't manage to take it. But it really is important. If I fall below that, everything becomes harder. It's like when you're tired and you're lethargic, you're not bringing the best you to any given situation. And so that again is something really important. So I'm glad you reminded me.
Well, and that is rough to struggle with sleep, but at least I admire the just the pattern of going to bed early. I think this week though I did get a message from you at 4:25 in the morning. I saw the timestamp when I woke up. I was like, yeah, that's what William's doing at 4:25. He's thinking about work and shooting me a chat message. So that is.
You didn't read it at 4:25, then it was fine.
I did not. But okay. Okay, this is something that I honestly don't really know how to word this, but something that I've noticed about you is, well, you're the vice president of our business development at Monitorbase. And so you're managing a team and also dealing with a lot of clients and especially high stakes sort of situations. And something that I've noticed is a skill, which I'm not exactly sure how to put this into words, but it's almost, I don't know which words you would use, but it's like you have a very acute compassion towards people where you keep, I feel like you're very logical about where problems have originated and not blaming things or putting unnecessary emotional strain on situations and just recognizing, okay, this is a problem that happened, but then also being very compassionate towards people and just keeping that sort of attitude. And so I guess the question here is a little bit broad, but what are your ways of maybe displaying leadership or just bringing in that compassion or that generous attitude to work, especially from a managerial perspective?
So I'm a pretty even keel person. So, you can get stressed out or things can get you, riled up a little bit, but I don't usually let that affect my response, or as often as I can, I try and control it. But I've always, even when someone does something exceptionally rude or, disrespectful or just mean, I try to remember what I want out of the situation, and keep in mind where I would like the circumstance to go. So when it's a client and they're having a difficult time, what you want is them to not have it. You want to solve the problem. You want that problem not to be there. And oftentimes the problem is way out of my hands. It's not something that I can directly fix or that I can directly identify. And sometimes it is. Sometimes I make a mistake, but usually what we're seeing is, some aspect of the system was broken or it was made one way and it wasn't quite understood that was the logic in the programming of our application. And so I always try and remember, where do I want this to end? What resolution do I want? And if I keep that in mind, then I can make the right decisions to get me closer to that. And so, in any circumstance I've been in, that's always been a really useful skill for me to just look forward and say, okay, what I would like is this resolution. And so when you work backwards from there, what you need to do is this and this and this. And so that to me is probably the extent of my strategy. As far as having compassion on people, I wouldn't rate myself as exceptionally compassionate, and I've done a fair amount of different personality tests. and I certainly don't rank very high on the compassion scale. But I actually do care a lot about people's experience, and in a lot of ways it's because it's tied to, I guess, my reputation. I'm working with big clients and large, and teams and large situations, and I'm the one trying to help direct and plan. And when something goes different than I set the expectations for, even if it wasn't something that I caused to go different, even if it, something broke that wasn't my fault, I do feel a personal responsibility for it. And that's very, very important to me, that I am honest, that I honor the things that I say I'll do, that I perform, and I to expectation, or to what I committed to. And so I think in a lot of ways that ends up being my motivation, is maintaining the, I guess, the quality of service and the quality of experience that I feel like the client deserves, that I feel like I promised that client, that I feel like that client should have. And so I feel like I'm always the client's advocate in that situation. It's not about they're doing it wrong. It's how can we help them get what they need? Because the truth is, and I don't know, for me in this job, I've loved the fact that if the client gets what they need, it actually works out to my benefit. So our interests are very mutually aligned. And so I don't know if that answers your question. That's the approach I take.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. Just like take a step back and say, okay, what's the real end goal here? And what are the steps that we need to take to get there? Is kind of what I'm hearing, if you were to boil it down.
Very good communication. You have to be willing to be open, admit when you're wrong, admit when you don't know, and communicate often and consistently.
Be very transparent.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to do a couple rapid fire questions. Okay. How do you define success?
I mean, I can give you the answer that I'm trying to make myself believe. But success in my, in my heart, is accomplishing the objective that you set out to accomplish. And that objective, I think you can adapt and change along the way, but you don't get to aim at a target, shoot, and it hits the target over here and call it success. I think that, that was a miss. So I do think there has to be intention behind it. Success without intention, I think is that was luck. That was happenstance. It was chance. But I guess, and that's using the word to define the word, but to call something a success that happened by accident, I think is maybe a little disrespectful. I think success requires intent and work to accomplish. And you might have fortune along your way, and there might be things that you learn and grow, and those all become useful, but that's not exactly a rapid fire answer, but there you go.
No, I think I think the intent part is really key there. And the work, I guess, both parts of that are very necessary. What makes you feel inspired or like your best self? And some parts we already touched on this, but what would you say?
I don't know, doing something that I'm proud of, that at the end of the day, I am happy to have people see or know about, and that makes me proud. My kids actually make me proud. Like when I see them do something, and I fully, like when I get logical about it, I recognize my kids aren't necessarily, they're not the cutest kids in the world, and they didn't just
but
taekwondo.
They actually are, because I know that I'm not biased towards your kids, and they are so adorable. So I can say that.
They are really sweet, but they certainly have their negative traits as well. They're little monsters sometimes, particularly my two boys. So, but yeah, to me, it's, I don't know, the things that are worthwhile, in pursuit, the exceptionally challenging accomplishments that defy the odds. Those are all very inspirational. But then I have things like, my kid just doing something that's absolutely ordinary, and for whatever reason, it's just, it makes me very proud. That's probably enough of an answer.
I said rapid fire questions, but these are like decently deep
There's a little bit
questions. So, okay. If you could interview anybody that's dead or alive, who would you interview and why?
I actually think it would be, it's like, I would like to think I could interview Elon Musk, but I probably couldn't. That probably wouldn't be, go well. I've read like the whole life history of John Rockefeller. And that was really interesting to me. And I think he would probably be a very interesting person to talk to. In a lot of ways, I think you can learn a lot about a person by talking to them and interacting with them a little bit. So I might choose someone like him just out of curiosity, because he's a relatively demonized figure, and in some ways rightfully so. There's a whole set of the monopolies and stuff that he did that were just, I think, ethically questionable. But on the same hand, he accomplished such a massive undertaking, and it was so extensive what he was able to do. It would be really interesting to try and understand, what motivated someone like that. If I'm not mistaken, he was, if you inflation adjust, he was the richest person that the world has ever seen. If you inflation adjust it today, I think it's close to $700 billion would have been his net worth. And so, maybe we'll see someone like Elon Musk accomplish something like that in his lifetime, because he's young and very ambitious. But you have to look at that and think how massive that is. And so again, it's like someone undertook something that seems absolutely impossible and they accomplished it. I would be really interested to see like what it took for them to get there, because I don't think you get there thinking that you're doing something bad. I think if you have guilt and you're ethically doing questionable things, I think you probably aren't able to accomplish some of those things. I think that undercuts you as you go. Maybe I'm wrong, but I would be interested to try and meet that person and see what they felt like. Just try and understand them better, understand what motivated them and what moved them, because that's a lot of motivation to get someone to move that far at something that difficult. And he's always been an interesting figure to me, so I would probably choose him.
And on that note, who are the top influential people in your life?
Top influential people in my life, honestly, Jordan Peterson has been really interesting to me. His books on his psychological, I guess, interpretation and viewpoint on the Bible and the archetypal stories, and even his Disney story analysis. Like, it sounds a little silly, but it's been incredibly fascinating for me the past few years to really jump in and read some of that stuff. And I feel like I've developed a bigger understanding of the world through that. Other influential people, I don't know. It depends on what you're talking about. For forging, Jason Knight is just the coolest guy, and he makes the coolest stuff. Neil Kamimura, again, like, they're people that I follow, and you end up following them for a specific topic, but then you learn about them as a person, and that becomes inspiring as well. So those two are awesome, and I've really enjoyed you feel like you almost get to know someone. And that's a little ridiculous, I know. It's just, I guess, the celebrity effect of it. And then
those are both forgers?
Yeah, both of them forge. Neil Kamimura actually has a really interesting video. He talks about mental health and his struggle with depression, and he gives kind of his life story, and it's really heartbreaking. But you'll see these people, and they're doing a thing that, I'm there because because they make really beautiful artistic work. But then you learn about them, and there's more depth to it. It's more impactful. So both of them, I think, are, it's been enjoyable, and then they influence you in one aspect of your life. I don't know. It's on the spot. I'm having a hard time thinking of more. There are certainly more, but
no, that's perfect. What advice would you give to your younger self?
Probably be more patient. I would advocate my younger self to look forward and make the decisions based on 10 years rather than 2 or 3 years. I felt really rushed wanting to get through and done with college. And I was just anxious and so done with it by the end. And I think there's real value to taking your time and forecasting beyond a little 2-year stretch. Because I got done with my associate's degree and then I was like, okay, I don't have something else to do. I'll do my bachelor's. And so then I rushed through my bachelor's. And by then I was really burned out on school, but it was partly just because of how quickly I tried to go through it. I got through my associate's very quickly. I got through my bachelor's in like a year and 4 months of on-campus work, and I just stacked everything in and I pushed through it. And I don't think that's super helpful. I think I'll burn myself out on things that I would have been more successful if I'd allowed myself the time. And so patience, I think, is a big one. You want to accomplish too much in too little time, and you'll ruin the whole thing if you're not careful, rather than giving yourself the time, and then you can actually get the end result you're looking for. So I don't feel like that was too devastating of a characteristic. I think my impatience probably works to my advantage in some circumstances. But force yourself to plan further and make decisions based on those longer plans rather than the shorter plans. And it's really hard to look forward 10 years in the future when you're young, but if you can put yourself in that situation and actually go through the exercise, that would be useful.
Yeah, I really like that. When going back to Derek Sivers, he told this story because he's kind of this type of person that his main goal is not really to accomplish any one thing, it sounds like, but more just to like soak up the essence of life. And he was talking, and that's a little bit different than what you just said, but he was telling this story about how he used to go on these bike rides, and he was like just working so hard because he wanted to beat his last record, and he just kind of hate the whole thing and be grinding through it. And his record, I think, was like 42 or 43 minutes for this one ride he would always do. And so one day he was like, oh, I can't just keep doing this and hating it. Like, I have to bring some enjoyment back to it. So he's like, I'm just going to do the same bike ride, but I'm going to just stop and enjoy it and not worry about trying to beat my record. So he did it and he timed it, and it was 45 minutes. And he was like, oh, are you kidding me? I've been breaking my back just for these extra 2 or 3 minutes. But I mean, I like the aspect of planning ahead, but also just that kind of idea of like not getting so burnt out that you're just over it. But okay.
It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And that's the case with life. So treat it like it's a marathon and that you're going to be doing this for a long time, and then make your trajectory that. Don't just try and run 26 miles as fast as you can all out.
I like that. Is there a self-help myth that you would just want to debunk and eliminate from Earth?
I think you'll get over, at least for me, I got to a point where I think self-help is a little bit of an addiction. You get a gratification from reading a new book, getting a new technique, and then jumping right from that into the next book and the next technique, and the next book and the next technique. And really quickly, or in my case, maybe way too much time went by before I realized it's like, no, if I think about it, I actually have all the information I need. I don't need another instructional on how to do this. I'm underutilizing what I know and over pursuing new information. And so it's not exactly a myth, but I would say there's certainly too much education as compared to too little action. I think most people are doing too little with what they do know. And so I guess I don't think you need as much help as you are, in a lot of cases, gathering up. What you need to do is have the faith and the confidence in yourself to go and pursue what you know you should do. And I think you're able to figure things out as you go very well. And so if you'll take that approach, I think you'll accomplish more. Certainly go out and study and read and gather up what you can. But there's no real substitute for just jumping in and getting started.
That's a really good point. All right, we're going to wrap things up with one last question, unless there's any other things that you want to add or that we haven't touched on.
Nope, this has been pretty thorough.
I would agree. So and kind of going back to Jordan Peterson, he's come up a couple times. What are your rules for life?
My rules for life.
And not saying you have to come up with all of your rules for life, but what are a couple of your rules for life?
I think honesty and transparency are important. If people can't trust you, you're not worth very much. And that's a little bit harsh, but I really do struggle interacting with people where you can't believe what they say. And so I think that's one of the really guiding things for me is maintaining that. I think one of the bigger ones is just self-assurance. In so many cases, you are capable of more than you realize, and it's self-doubt that's kind of sabotaging that. And so, you're certainly not capable of everything, but in a lot of cases, you're probably capable of just about anything if you'll dedicate to it. And so, be humble and be willing to learn, and listen and ask questions. And I think you'll be surprised, or at least in my life, I've always been surprised at how willing people are to teach you, as long as you approach it with the right attitude. If you take, if you're too confrontational, if you're too abrasive, if you're, one way or the other, people don't want to help you, but people are generally quite helpful and willing and wanting to do good. And so if you show enthusiasm about something someone is passionate about, they'll generally, reciprocate by showing enthusiasm about what they're passionate about. So, honesty, humility, hard work, dedicate yourself to something and stick to it over the long term. I think that's the path to success. And I think people bounce around too much because they get impatient and they go out. So, that hard work, I think, means, be willing to look forward and say, this is going to take time, this is going to take effort, and then be willing to do the things that takes to get to success. And a lot of people will quit things and go to the next thing because it looks like the easier, faster fix. And I seldom see something big or impressive or fantastic happen out of a short-term change to the easy route, and they got in the fast lane and then they got it. Usually you're looking at, and it sometimes happens, but usually, in my life, it's like, nope, you're going to have to just work until you get there. So be honest, stay humble, work hard. Those would be big to me.
All right. Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for your time, William. If anyone has any questions, they can always email sales@MonitorBase, and we'd be happy to answer your questions. Is there anything you want to say to close out?
No, I think we covered it. Thank you. That was kind of fun to go through.
I agree. All right. Well, thank you. We appreciate it.
See you later.
Bye.